It was on a sunny day in July 2012 when I first realized the importance of work-life balance. I was in Vienna on a summer school, work-life balance. I am Anne Annink, a final year PhD student at the Faculty of Social Science at Erasmus University, and my research is about the work-life balance of self-employed workers. But it was not the course in Vienna or the teachers that gave me that valuable insights. Because during that course I fainted. And I recovered, I came by, but after the course I fainted again. So I went back to my hotel room and, well, lay down in bed to take a rest. But what happened next is during the evening and the night I still felt dizzy. So I called an ambulance, and in the middle of the night I was brought to the hospital with the flashing lights on because my blood pressure and my heart rate was so low. And the nurses, they kept on talking to me to keep me conscious, but I could not really answer them. And maybe because of that, they started to assume that I was pregnant. So her talk turned into a preach about condoms, birth control measures, pills, etc. And I still could not answer her. So at the end of the ride, well, she had convinced herself, and me too, that I was pregnant. So it was really scary for me. Thinking, okay, I was pregnant, and then I was, at 3 AM I was brought to the maternity department to take a test. And I was not pregnant. So, what happened next is that I was brought back to the airport to catch my planned flight home. But just before boarding, I fainted again. And my blood pressure was so low, and then you cannot fly. So I was brought back to the hospital without my luggage, because I was already checked in. And in the hospital, more tests followed. And every day, psychologists came by my bed to ask me questions about my eating patterns, because it was now assumed that I had an eating disorder, which I had not. But nothing really came out of that test. So I was sent back home after 5 or 6 days. And well, good luck with your stress. So I was back at home. And back home, I immediately went back to work, although I was still dizzy all the time. And it was only when I was lying with my legs up the wall and my roommate at the office said, well, maybe now is the time to take a rest, to go home, that I realized, okay, I cannot work like this. I started to realize that work-life balance is a precondition for being able to work. So, what I would like today to talk about is a little bit of my research findings about the work-life balance of independent workers, but also my experiences with work-life balance and with burnout. So what I would like to talk about is work-life balance as a precondition for success, but also happiness, common challenges we all face as PhD students, and ways to do less but achieve more. So how is work-life balance a precondition? According to role theory, we all have different roles in our lives. So you're a PhD student, but also a son or a daughter, you're a friend, you have your own personal interests, your hobbies, etc. And in all those roles, you behave differently. You have different values, you have different contexts. So it says, it's if your life is the theater and you're acting in those roles in different ways. And this is a personal experience because we all have different values and things that makes you happy. So my hobby is not your hobby and my friends are not your friends. So what is important to you might be different for me. So, but what is work-life balance then about? I want to let you experience what work-life balance is. So I would like to ask you to stand up, please, for a moment. Make sure that you're not touching anything. So take some space. And please step your feet hip width aside and then close your eyes. And you don't have to do anything, just feel and experience. So close your eyes and just stand there relaxed. Relax your arms, your hands, roll your shoulders up and down, and just breathe. Stand here. And then you go with your attention to your feet. Just bend your knees a little bit, just stand here relaxed. Go with your attention to your feet. And when you're focusing on your feet, you will notice that work-life balance is a process. You're never in balance all the time. You're circling around the center, sometimes to the left, sometimes to the right, to the front, to the back. So work-life balance is a process. Second, it depends on your individual capabilities. So it depends on your own body, your experiences, your skills, and your context. And third, work-life balance is not about time, but about attention. It's not as if you're standing here for a longer period of time that you will be in balance more. But when you focus your attention on your feet, then you will experience balance. So to summarize, work-life balance is a personal experience, and you are the only one who can balance yourself. So you may open your eyes and take your seat again. So when I went back to work, it took me a few weeks to acknowledge that I was tired. I called it tired. But I understood that I could not continue to work like this, being dizzy all the time. So although the signals might be obvious to others, the ones who experience burnout, they often deny it. So, okay, I acknowledged that I was tired, maybe super tired, but I was certainly not burned out. So I did not allow my parents to drop the B word, short for burnout. And I thought, well, okay, when I just go to bed early, I will be fine. So why was it so difficult for me to acknowledge that I was burned out? Because I felt ashamed. And I felt also guilty because I counted my working hours, which were exactly like 40 hours a week, and so I should be fine. There was nothing to worry about. But it was also difficult for me because my colleagues didn't dare to ask me, what's wrong with you? What is happening? Why are you lying there with your legs at the wall? And why are you not home? So when I wanted to go home at around 3 a.m. for a power nap, for example, I still made up these excuses. Yeah, I have an appointment, I'll see you tomorrow. So it was really difficult. So instead of resting, I really fought against my tiredness, which worsened the situation. So who goes to the gym regularly? Who does weightlifting? Okay. Then you probably know what happens during a workout. When you're working out your muscles, you damage your muscles a bit, and your body repairs them afterwards, and this is when your muscles grow and you become fitter and stronger. But if you continue to work out without taking a rest, then you will damage your muscles even further. So your training has the opposite effect. And the same goes for your brains. If you continue to work without taking a rest, you eventually will burn your brains out, literally. So if you work longer hours and don't take a rest in between, your working hours have an opposite effect. And research shows that the most effective number of hours is 35 hours a week. And of course, you have to meet deadlines sometimes, and you can put in extra hours, so every now and then. But this can only be done for a short period of time. After 4 weeks, you have to go back to your 35 again to balance it out. But why is that so difficult for us? Well, today many people identify strongly with their work. So what you do is important. When you don't know someone, the first question you ask is, what do you do? And being busy is seen as a good thing. But according to the ancient Greek philosophers, leisure was the highest aim. So Aristotle already said the end of all labor is to gain leisure. Because leisure was seen as the time where we can be most fully human, and this is when our great ideas come up. Because we have a rest, we are creative, we are open, our minds open up, and we allow ourselves to be human, to come up with great ideas. In the Middle Ages, busyness was seen as a sin. It was a form of laziness. So on the one hand you had paralysis, so being freeze, not being able to do anything at all. And on the other hand you had acedia, which is running around frenetically, just being busy doing anything but nothing really substantial. So already then, time was valued as our most precious commodity, and we should spend it wisely in accordance to our values and our preferences, but also to contribute to society. So what do you think that the punishment was for those people suffering from acedia? Who has an idea? It was not cutting your head off. No, it was working with a schedule. So today, our schedules become increasingly fragmented, and that's called time confetti. So we have a lot of distractions which make that we cannot focus anymore. We don't work on a schedule anymore, but we do a bit of this and a bit of that, and in between we're checking our emails, mobile phones, etc. So doing a PhD, you really need to focus, especially if you want to come up with a grand theory or you want to write a good paper, you need to focus. But the problem is that we suffer from FOMO and xomophobia. FOMO is the fear of missing out. And xomophobia, the fear of going without your mobile phone or social media. So writing a thesis takes a lot of focus and concentration, but it may also limit yourself. For example, if you're lying in bed and you cannot stop thinking about writing or an article or something you've read or worrying about your data collection. Or when it becomes the only thing you can talk about with your friends. This is related to the feeling of loneliness. So we often think about loneliness as without being good friends or families. Especially international students, they think, okay, well, I don't have my family or my closest friends nearby to have a coffee with, also because of the time difference. But it occurs a lot among PhD students, feeling lonely as the opposite of feeling connected. And indeed, you might feel connected to close friends and families, but also to yourself. So you can also think of activities, for example, listening to music, ice skating, dancing, for example, when you feel connected to yourself as the opposite of feeling lonely. So what is the effect of all these challenges we have to deal with? So remember the different roles we have in our life. And research shows that we cannot compensate satisfaction in one role with the other. So if you're very successful in your PhD, that does not compensate for your feeling of happiness in your relationship with your parents or for your friends, for example, or in your own personal interests or hobbies. So your happiness depends on satisfaction in all those roles. But we've already shown the slides of your brains and the guilt complex, for example. You're feeling stressed if there's some kind of internal role conflict. And there are 3 causes for this role conflict. So the first is that you cannot meet internal expectations. This is related to perfectionism. So as a PhD student in the hospital, you might have to deal with clients, or with patients, I should say. And when you're dealing with those patients, maybe you don't know everything, so you have to check and double check and check again. And that takes a lot of time. And maybe in your specialty there are not so many places. So you think, okay, I should do extra research, I should do extra board functions, and these I have to do all in my free time and the weekends, for example. So internal high expectations may cause role conflict. But also external expectations from your family, for example, but also from your supervisor. And it's not only different expectations or higher expectations, but also when they're not clear. So who of you exactly knows when you're ready to defend your PhD? How many articles do you have to write? What is the quality? Which journals? Who does now exactly? Okay, just ask your supervisor, because it may be a source of role conflict. And the third is accepting roles that are beyond your capacity, so that's taking up too much work. So how to deal with those challenges then? So when I came back at work, I had to see the company doctor, and he told me to build up my hours again. So the first week I had to work 1 hour, second week 2 hours a day, third week 3 hours a day. And at first I thought, okay, this makes sense, because you have to take a rest, but then it's also good to keep on moving and to get back to work again. But at a certain point I noticed that it had the opposite effect. So after 5 or 6 hours working, I became super tired. And every extra hour had the opposite effect. So then I started to determine my own working hours. And that was a long process of letting go of expectations of others, but it really worked well, and I still do. So after 5 or 6 hours I go sporting, for example. For me that's the same way to find my balance again. But it took me a long time to acknowledge and say, okay, bye, I see you tomorrow, I leave at 3 because I'm going to the gym. So the benefit of being burned out is that other people don't expect you to attend all those meetings anymore. And also my teaching obligations, I have to teach for 30% of my time, they were cancelled. So I experienced that being able to focus and prioritizing my PhD saved me a lot of time and energy. And of course, as I said, well, of course you have to go to meetings sometimes, but realize, is this really important to me? Or is it just time spending? And is this my own expectation, or is it the expectations of others? And is it true? So, time management is a popular understanding in popular journals or magazines like this. This says 20 tips for your most productive month ever. But is it really helpful to cramp your schedule like this? To do more to achieve more? Nature shows us otherwise. So who's familiar with the law of Pareto, or the 80-20 principle? Pareto was an Italian, and he discovered that 80% of the land in Italy was owned by 20% of the inhabitants. And he also saw that 80% of all his peas in his garden came from 20% of all his trees. So it's a common rule of thumb, or a law of nature, that 80% of all revenues come from 20% of all causes. So you also see this in 80% of the world's income is distributed among 20% of all inhabitants. And 80% of all traffic occurs during 20% of the time. 80% of all crimes is committed by 20% of all criminals. And 80% of all journal articles is written by 20% of all researchers. So 80% of success is determined by 20% of your efforts, also in your personal life. So imagine that you're this energy ball or sun, focusing your energy. You can spread it all out by doing a bit of everything, but also focus it and achieve more. So this means that if you focus on your best 20%, you can achieve 80% of all your results. And 80% of all your efforts only relate to a small output, so to say. And this is very counterintuitive, because in society today we assume that the more is the better. But nature shows us otherwise, so think about that. Today you have the opportunity to stand still, to reflect for yourself, and to think about what is important to you in all those roles. So this day offers you a great opportunity to focus on your career, but also on your life in general. So I invite you to just take this day, stand still and look in the mirror or in your reflection and think about it. I wish you all a good journey. Good luck.